Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host Salah Al-Laythi, and I am delighted to have with me today Daniel Mezick. Daniel is an executive coach, author, and speaker. He's the founding member of the Open Leadership Network. He authored the first book that I actually got my attention and got me curious about the work of Daniel was The Culture Game, which has been published a while ago. And he then co-authored a book about the open space agility. And then recently, in the recent past, he co-authored another book called The Inviting Leadership. So I'm really excited to have you with me today. Daniel, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So before we get started, I want to briefly learn about your journey. How did you end up in this space of coaching and, open space, and, what got you here? What got you where you are today?
Yeah, so there are two or three significant events that happened. The first thing that happened was in the 90s, I had a consulting and training firm around Microsoft platforms and tools. Mm-hmm. And I had a partner relationship with Microsoft around something called the Developer Days program. So I was the host of those Microsoft-sponsored events, developer conference events in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, and in Boston, Mass. For many, many years. And, I guess we had about 55, 60 people in three offices across three states in the 90s. And then all that stuff kind of unraveled with the year 2K fiasco and the .bomb crash, and the music kind of stopped playing. And then for a few years, I had a kind of a smooth landing, very smooth landing. And then for a few years, I didn't quite know what was next for me because, the staffing and training business had materially changed, and I didn't know what the next thing was. And that was around 2003 to about 2005 or so. I was just kind of poking around looking for something new. And then I came across the Scrum thing, and I took a CSM class in 2006 with a guy named Lowell Lindstrom. And the class was in Chicago. I flew to Chicago. I went to the class. And I've been doing the Agile stuff since then. Now, what's really interesting is in 1997, I was doing, I had an exclusive contract to teach Microsoft platforms and tools with a company called IDX. IDX in Boston, they were on Huntington Street. They eventually got bought by GE Healthcare. But there was a guy working there who had just showed up as the CTO, and his name was Jeff Sutherland. And I was hearing his name mentioned in my class, and people weren't too happy with him. They didn't like this daily meeting, and they referred to the 3 stupid questions and stuff. And I was just too busy to really notice what was going on. So I didn't really pick up on it again until after I landed after 2003. But I was there in the same building with Jeff when he was formulating Scrum in the early days in Boston at IDX. And he mentions IDX all the time, as he always thanks them when they, I think in the back of the Scrum guide, there's still a reference to IDX, GE Healthcare, and all that kind of stuff. So, interestingly, the early formulation of Scrum was a forced marched affair. If you didn't like it, you could leave. Mm. That's how it went when Jeff was formulating it.
I think a lot of the changes that I've been through as well is like, you get on or get out type of change, like, either get on board or find something else. And so I want to step back, so what led you to write the book, like The Culture Game?
So the Culture Game book was published in 2012. And what I did was I started taking notes, during the coaching, after about 2009 or so, 2008, 9, I started keeping a notebook of what I observed the very best Scrum teams doing. And I started making a list, and I found 16 behaviors that they demonstrated, no matter, what company they were in or whatever, they were doing these things. And I wrote them down. And those became the Culture Game book, 16 optimizations, really local optimizations. And if you do like any 2 or 3 of them, your team got better. So things like facilitating your meeting, announcing your intent, being punctual. The best teams I observed were very punctual in their group level relating. People weren't wandering in late, dragging their feet. People showed up on time or they were early. They were playing the game, but they were playing serious. So I put those 16 things in a book, and they became kind of manual for the manager who isn't going to leave their company, but wants to make their little corner of it a little bit better. And that was what part 1 and part 2 was about in that book. And then part 3 was how to socialize these ideas to other managers so it could spread. And the basic idea there was to invite them to your meetings and see how your meetings were run. So one of the chapters in the book was entitled Game Your Meetings. And that's when we got into the 4-part game structure. But 2012, I wrote that book because I felt like I had something to say, and I had quite a bit there. And I included the use of triads. So you'd get together with 2 other managers and you would triad with them and kind of conspire to bring these ideas to their group as well. And I was blessed to have Dave Logan, who wrote Tribal Leadership. He gave me over 30 quotes for part 3. And the Culture Game book was the first sort of app of tribal leadership, an application of tribal leadership. But at that time, I was already formulating open space agility. And your listeners, Salah, who go to chapter 21 in Culture Game book, that the chapter is Open the Space. And the careful reader will see that the seeds of OSA were already in that book. I was already getting success with this before after open space idea. When I was writing the Culture Game book, I was already well along with OSA by the time that published in 2012.
Yeah, I remember when I read the book, and that was one of the chapters that caught my attention. Open the space, as well as the one of to run your meetings as a game. And there is connection there, because one of the elements, or one of the game structure you describe, is this idea of like opt-in participation, right?
Yeah.
And you even wrote something about making your meeting optional. So and what if people had a choice to join the meeting? Would they join? So there's a lot of it seems like you had a gradual approach to change, or to transformation.
Well, my own personal transformation was gradual, because I was constantly looking for ways to deliver more value than my customers were paying for. So how can we get the same results with less of my time? Or how could we get much better results with the same amount of my time, right? That was always on my mind. How do I deliver more value to my clients? And what I realized through these experiments was that the people they already have are dying to engage, but they want to be invited. They're not going to help out unless you make space for them to participate and engage. And what better way to make space than to invite them? And so that's the first thing I do when I talk with executive teams. I will not go into any company unless I can get access to the executive team. And then I need to walk that executive team. I mean, transformation starts with the transformation of the leadership team, in my view. So, we work with the leadership team. They learn what it's going to take to support, say, Scrum, Agile, Kanban, whatever it is they choose to do. Beyond authorizing the budget, they need to support in certain ways, and it's going to require their engagement, Salah, of the executives. So if I can't get that commitment from them, my work is done there, and we don't go to the next step. But if they're willing to do the things that are needed to support, which includes engaging in very specific ways, then we go and we do it. We do it with the leadership team, with the people they already have. We do use external consultants, and they might be there for 4 or 6 months or something, 2 or 3 or 4 days a week, certainly not every single day. And we teach the executives that the people they already have can carry this transformation forward. One of the things I've learned from doing this work is the people who resist the most, that have the most energy around resisting, they could actually become the new champions, because they have a whole lot of heat, they care a lot, or they wouldn't speak up. So if you can convince them and show them that this is actually good for them and good for everyone, they'll just completely flip. They'll go from resisting to full-on support. They'll completely skip over tolerance and go right to full-on support, because they have energy. So listen carefully to the loudest and most energetic resistors. Those are potentially the new champions, believe it or not.
I think a lot of these ideas are connected. They're related. Like you say, you start with executives. You get their commitment. So basically, part of opt-in. You need to opt into this idea of change before we actually move forward. So since you wrote this book, and I know you've wrote a couple more, what has changed since then? How do this conversation go with the executives? Are they open to commitment?
Yeah. So working with the executives, here's the first thing I want your listeners to know. No matter how in your current sponsor is, your executive sponsor, let's say it's the CEO or the top person, and they've got 89 people reporting to them or something that are also VPs. it's naive. It's completely naive to think that there isn't resistance inside that leadership. There is. So that needs to be addressed. So that's the first thing we do is we have that conversation with the leader who brought us in, and then we discuss, listen, we know for a fact that there's resistance inside your leadership team. There has to be by definition, or it wouldn't be a leadership team, right? If you have a bunch of yes people, what do you need them for, right? You need diversity of opinion and experience and viewpoint to have a good leadership team. So of course there's going to be conflict. So let's throw that moose on the table and let's have that conversation as a leadership team. Can I tell you a story about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So last year I worked with a leadership team who wanted to scale Scrum across the enterprise. So what I did was I made a little scorecard, a little checklist thing where I pulled quotes from the Scrum Guide and put them down. Like one of them was, for the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions. And then there were two scoring opportunities. The first opportunity was a 1 to 10 scoring. 10 was totally agree. 1 is I don't agree at all. And the question was, rate your level of support for this statement, your professional leadership level of support for the statement. For the product owner to be successful, everyone must respect her decisions. Okay, then when you scored that, then it's like, now score this, what you perceive to be this leadership team's level of support for this statement. And we have that conversation with the leadership team, one question after another. Direct quotes from the Scrum Guide. And when we got to this quote that I just said, there was one guy who was quiet. He was from overseas. I think he was from it was a globally distributed 900-person software engineering group, global engineering, run by 14 people, 13 direct reports, and this guy that I was working for. And it got real quiet when I brought up this quote. And this one guy that didn't really say anything very at all, didn't say much. All of a sudden he spoke up. He made a throat clearing sound and he said, "I don't think we can do this in our company. We're not organized this way, and it's just not going to work for us." And this is a fellow who didn't say very much previously, and it got real quiet. It was an online call because they were all over the world, and I didn't do anything to break the silence. I just held it. 20 seconds went by, 30 seconds went by, 40 seconds went by. It was very awkward. And this one woman that was on the leadership team, she spoke up. She's like, "I've got something to say." After about a minute of total silence with 14 global leaders, no sound. She says, "Look, I've been at this company for 8 months, and here's what I can tell you. The company that I worked at before did exactly what Daniel is advocating here. And it was painful, and it was awkward. And in the beginning, we didn't know what we were doing. But after a couple of weeks, after about a month, we actually got way better. And everything that he is describing here actually does work, and it's really just a question of our resolve to support the process as described or not. And I, for one, am willing to support the process because I have direct experience seeing this Scrum stuff work."
Yeah.
And that tipped the whole conversation. But there was a moment there where, could have went either way.
Sounds like that you could gauge commitment early on, so that you don't have to invest a lot of time and effort into something that the leadership team is not committed to, or they may commit to by saying, yes, we'll do this, but that it's not really they're not fully committed because you haven't explicitly got to a point where, okay, what is it that they are committing to? You have specific things like, respecting the decisions of the product owner, being able to support the person who's going to be deciding on things. So very specific commitments that you're gauging early on before you move forward.
Very much so. And it's important for the leadership team to understand that what they're really supporting is a change in decision rights. So around the world, we implement Scrum, we implement the roles, we implement the artifacts, we implement the events, and we implement some of the rules, but not most of them. And the rules that we don't implement are the rules around, authorized decision rights by role. So the product owner prioritizes the backlog, and that's their decision, and it's their right according to the way Scrum's defined. If you don't implement that decision right, not only will Scrum not work, but your culture will stay the same. So one of the things I've posted lately is that I can change culture in 3 days. It's very, very simple. All I have to do is implement a change in the way decisions are made and who makes them. And then once that boundary is tested and it gets around that it's not going to be breached, that there has been a change and it's real, that culture will begin to change in 3 days. And that's what happens when you bring on Scrum decision rights. Now we understand why there's a lot of crappy Scrum going around, because they don't implement the decision rights and they're getting like a 10 or 15% performance improvement. And for most companies, they think that's great. And they don't want to bite the bullet and do the painful thing of implementing the decision rights. But if they did, they would get a double, a triple, a quadruple in everything they're measuring. But most companies can't pay the price.
I want to highlight something you mentioned about the story you just shared about, like, this silence. There's you're as an executive coach, you're trying to expose the conflict and just like put it out there and see if the team is willing to discuss it or address it. And that could be very hard. People don't really like to talk about difficult things. So how do you navigate that as a coach? Do you, I think there is some sort of a setup or like a preparation that happens leading to that point.
So first of all, the broader issue of access to executives is a really, really important issue for anyone who's bringing organizational change. It's not okay to just be paid and go through the motions and work at the team level. You need access to the executive team if there's going to be lasting change. So that's number one. Number two, I want your readers or your listeners to know, openleadershipnetwork.com. There's a class called Acting as an Executive Coach. And that's a supporting class. That Open Leadership Network is about open patterns and practices, like the use of open space and other practices like that. But you're never going to get a shot at doing those practices and patterns if you don't have access to executives. So we teach this class about that. And, executive coaching is very awkward. These executives are under a lot of stress. Like, you might not realize it, but their jobs are always at risk. Like 3 bad decisions in a row and you're gone. It's fast. Most companies can't put up with 3 expensive decisions in a row that are wrong. So executives are constantly put on decisions and they have to commit to these decisions, and they've got to have a good track record over the past several months to keep their job or they're going to be gone. And the other thing is they have to look very confident. They believe they have to appear confident to everyone because everyone's counting on them. And the other thing that's a part of the psychology of executives is that they feel quite isolated by their very high level of authorization, Salah. So, for example, they're not going to get a straight answer from any of their direct reports or their, skip levels, because everyone realizes the executive could end their job. And that would be at a minimum very inconvenient, right? Or worse. So they feel isolated. They feel kind of like a fraud because they have to act confident, but actually they're very unsure about making decisions based on incomplete information, which is what they have to do all day. And there's other dynamics around the psychology of the executive coach. So in the class, we teach this, and we also teach what to do and what not to do. So in that example, where I just let the silence hang there, this is an example of how executive system coaching is very awkward. When you coach an executive, you're not coaching the executive, you're coaching the leadership system that surrounds him or her that they're a part of. It's the leadership system that decides, not the CEO. So you've got to have an executive presence, and you can cultivate that in yourself by showing up a certain way. And one of those ways is to hold silence once in a while.
I think it's a coaching skill that many coaches / consultants, sometimes when you're wearing multiple hats, there's this urge that you have to fill the silence or break the silence and say something. But as you just described and demonstrated in this story, that, that silence, that sitting in the discomfort of not knowing what's going to happen next is essential for the system to respond, right?
Yeah, it is. And that's when we broke through. That was the day we broke through, and everyone made a commitment to support the Scrum across the company. Mm-hmm. And we discussed, the decision rights by role and how this is actually done, and how the executives have a critical role to play in these boundary tests that are going to be made around the new decision rights, and that you have to support your product owners. And if you don't, you're not going to get what you say you want. So, there's that. And then, we were talking about the books and like, how did I get to where I am now, and like what led me here and stuff like that. The second book, I actually had a deforming experience at a client where I thought I was doing great agile coaching work. I was there 2 or 3, 4 days a week for a couple months, 3 months, and I was 2 months into it, and we were getting results, and things were going pretty good. And I finished my lunch one day, and I went into the men's washroom to wash my hands, and I was in front of the sink washing my hands alone. No one else was in there. And then this guy comes in, and he's a Russian engineer, and he starts washing his hands. And it's him in front of his sink, me in front of my sink. We're looking in the mirror. I looked in the mirror. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" His name was Anatoly. I said, "Hey, Anatoly, how's it going, man? You know, how you doing?" In a thick Russian accent, he goes, "Oh," he says, "you want to know how I am doing?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Here's how I'm doing." He stopped and he grabbed a piece of, like a paper towel. He started wiping his hands. He pointed at me and he goes, "Agile sucks and so do you." Just like that.
Wow.
Right to my face. And I'm like, "Why?" And I could feel my whole face getting red. He goes, "Nobody gives a shit what I think, what I want, what I feel about this agile crap. I just have to do it. Nobody cares about what I have to say. I have some things to say. Nobody cares. So now I don't care." And then he turned his back on me. He rolled up the paper in a ball and he flung it very precisely into the trash. And then he walked by me and says, "So Daniel, have a nice day. Goodbye." And he walked out. And he left me there in silence looking in the mirror. And I realized I am viewed as an extension of management here. And I am viewed as an oppressor who is pushing something management wants. This guy never was even asked. And management had good intentions at the time. They just were ignorant because I never coached them through this idea that people need to be part of it if it's going to last. That was my big wake-up call. That was in like 2010. 2011. And that's when I, was finishing up with the Culture Game book, and I was starting to experiment with open space agility after that. Yeah. But it was that guy and that experience that totally changed. Like, I thought I was doing great work, but he thought I was doing really crappy work.
That is a really wake up call for, like, that it's unexpected. And a lot of coaches, a lot of us who are in this business of coaching because we want to help others improve, sometimes, sometimes the helping is not helping, right? We have to take a look at the mirror, literally and metaphorically, to see if what we're doing is actually helping. And, this seems to be something that a blessing in disguise of like someone sharing the feedback. It does seem harsh to be blunt in the feedback, but like you said, it made you realize something is missing here.
Something's really missing here. And I was party to it, and I was quite ignorant about it until that day. And then I realized something. So ever since then, I've been working towards making sure people are included. And I've learned a lot of things along the way. Agile itself is supposedly focused on people, motivated individuals and interactions, respect for people, and so on. But routinely around the world, Agile is imposed, which doesn't do anything but generate transactions for consultants. I want to say something about authority too. If you go into a client organization, it's very flattering and very edifying and very feels very pleasant to be considered the authority and the expert. But actually, when you leave, the people have to pick up the pieces. So if you take too authoritative of a stance, then the whole thing's just going to implode when you leave, because you were the single source of truth and you were the authority figure and the blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So a too authoritative of a stance when you're coaching actually works against the long-term success of what you say you're trying to do. So they need to know that you're leaving and by when. So that's usually the way I do it, is if the people know they only have so much time to have an expert professional around to ask questions and give guidance, then they get busy picking it up for themselves. And then they step up, and then you can step out.
I think it speaks to another idea that I think you've been sharing for a long time, this idea of willingness to work with the willing. And coaching doesn't work if people are not willing. It's just not possible to coach someone who doesn't want to show up, or shows up and they're not really interested, or they're just showing up because someone told them they have to show up.
The social world, the human world, runs on opt-in participation. Mm-hmm. Harrison Owen says all systems are open and all systems are self-organizing. If systems are self-organizing, it means that there's agency at play, that individuals are making choices. So in the world I live in, I believe that the willing people power all the improvement, and the unwilling people power many, if not all, of the impediments. So the real trick is, how do we get willingness going? It has something to do with decision making. So if you're not making enough decisions, you don't have enough autonomy, in other words, you will disengage. And the top performers generally need more autonomy than other performers. So what happens is, when the autonomy starts to contract in a company, the first people to go are the top performers, because they have options. And I wrote about this recently in a LinkedIn post. I don't know if you saw it, but there's a little narrative about a guy who's experiencing an imposed organizational change, and how some of the best people have already left, and how this person's thinking about leaving, polishing up his resume and getting ready to leave because he's making fewer decisions than he made before in the so-called agile transformation. And that post so far it's not even up a week. It'll be up a week tomorrow at 2:00. It has 11,000 views.
Wow.
11,000.
I mean, this idea of autonomy, I think, resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Know about like the work of Daniel Pink, who wrote about autonomy is one of the three things that drive motivation, purpose, and masteries is the other two. But like autonomy is a big one, especially for knowledge work and creative work. It's hard to feel like you have to be told what to do and be engaged in the work.
Right. Plus, your top performers don't want to be told what to do. They just want to know what the desired outcome is, and what the constraints are, and then they want to just go and use their creativity. And of course, when we talk about autonomy, what we're really talking about is authorization to decide. In other words, authorized decision rights is the technical term that I like to use, because one of the things we have going on around this whole topic of autonomy is some very imprecise language. When we talk about autonomy, what do we really mean? Do we mean I get to pick my parking space before I go into the office? Does it mean I get to take the stairs or go up the elevator? Or is it something more than that?
Yeah.
Right. So most of us want some control over our work. Tony Hsieh, you ever heard of him?
Yeah. Yep.
CEO of Zappos, right? He recently died. He wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. In that book, he said that people, to feel good, need a sense of perceived control. So when we force change on people, we're reducing their sense of perceived control. That's going to reduce their happiness, and they're going to disengage or maybe even quit. So when we talk about autonomy, Salah, what we really mean is, how much decision-making power do I have over my own work? That's what it comes down to. So that's what I coach executive teams to focus on, is making sure that the authorized decision rights do not fall below a certain threshold below which the best people will disengage. Because the first thing I do is I discuss with the executives about how they could lose their best people, and that would be a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And how to avoid it. And we have that conversation about autonomy and authorized decision rights, and it's usually a very interesting conversation.
So there's sort of a paradox here. Like, earlier you said leaders are under a lot of pressure, executives specifically. They're three bad decisions and they're out, or that happens really quickly, especially publicly traded companies. And then you have on the other end, if they don't give up some of the decision rights to the people who are working with them, the top talent, then they lose the top talent, or people are disengaged. How do you balance that? Have you found ways to work through balancing those two things?
Yeah, I have. Lately, I've been coaching executives that one of their primary responsibilities is to create the space, right? So more specifically, they have to engage in good game design. So when I talk about game, I mean the 4-part game definition from Jane McGonigal. She wrote a book called Reality is Broken about 10, 15 years ago. And on page 22 of that book, she describes the good game has clear goals, clear rules, a way to track progress, and opt-in participation. So I teach the executives, listen, you need to create an environment where it's fun to play the game that you designed. And you're going to have to give people at least a perceived sense of control with some decision rights at the local level, so they have some autonomy over how work that they do is done. So they participate either individually or with others in making decisions about the how of the work, right? So the why, the what, and the how, we have that conversation. The why belongs to executives. They need to repeat that in many different forms so everyone understands the why. In the military, they call that the commander's intent. So everyone knows the intent of the top executive or the leadership system. And then the what mostly belongs to product people. They define the what. And there's some overlap between the why and the what, but it should be mostly separated. And then of course, teams need to own their how, and product people should stay out of it. Technical people make technical decisions. Product people make product decisions. And executive people make executive decisions. That's how it's supposed to go. And in all these frameworks, there's a portfolio level, program level, and the product level, right? Or the team level. And those are the three levels that you need to be careful of with the what, the why, the what, and the how.
I want to shift to the idea of open space. How does open space play into this and the open leadership model? Because you mentioned something about creating the space.
Yeah.
And I know open space has specific rituals like, the theme and crafting the theme. So that might be the leadership intent. There's a question that you can craft with the leadership. How does that play into this idea? How does open space play into this idea of creating the leadership intent?
So the first thing I want to say about open space is for your listeners is if they're unfamiliar with this open space meeting format, I want them to go to openleadershipnetwork.com and click the about menu item, and you'll see that there's a page that says about an open space, and you can learn all about this format. It is a format where people self-organize around a theme, and they create discussions around the theme, and those discussions go into a book of proceedings, and the book of proceedings becomes input into action planning and decision making. Okay, so the leader invites everyone to this event, and the event is it's structured. It has a goal, which is to explore the theme. It has rules like, it starts at this time, it ends at that time. There's a sponsor, there's a facilitator, there's participants. There's an agenda wall that's initially blank that gets filled in. What I'm getting at is open space is a kind of meeting. And in the Culture Game book, we describe how meetings are essentially games in the most positive sense. And that if you tune up like what the goal is, what the rules are, how people track their progress, and you invite them, people find that to be quite enjoyable. So that's what open space is. It's a game about exploring the theme. And there's three roles, right? There's the sponsor who authorizes the event and invites everybody. There's the facilitator who works for him or her to take the people through the process. And then there's the participants, and that's the everybody else, right? So there's these three roles. The participants, at least in theory, have identical levels of authorization in open space. So if I report to you, and we go into that open space event, I'm mindful that you're there, but you're not telling me what to do in open space. That's for me to tell me what to do. So everyone's responsible for their own experience in open space, and nobody can make anyone else do anything they're unwilling to do. That's one of the requirements of open space. Now, another requirement of open space is that there needs to be high potential for conflict. Now, when there is conflict, let's say you and I are a couple of guys who, we work in different departments, and we show up at the open space meeting, and we're in a session together, and we're having a heated discussion that's actually in conflict. Well, we're both there at will. So that right off the bat makes it easy for us to be respectful to each other, because at any given time, if you just cross the line, I'll just walk away, right? So those respectful interactions tend to actually, the respectful nature of those interactions tends to extend the quantity and the quality of the conversation when there's conflict, right? Because neither one of us has to be there unless we want to. So obviously we're in conflict because we want to. See what's going on there?
Yeah.
So there's all this really, really rich stuff that comes out of open space, and everyone else who's listening is getting their minds changed about what the right direction is for this group now about this topic that we're talking about, whatever it is in the session. So open space has this remarkable quality of bringing out the best in people.
I see a lot of patterns between where we started this conversation, or like the engagement invitation, to the silence, allowing the silence, the space for people to chime in. Because again, I mean, if you as the coach or the facilitator are providing the answer constantly, then you're not allowing the space to people who might have ideas, but they're not ready to share it, they won't be able to chime in, right? So you gotta give them that space. And so with open space, you have a structure, you have a way to bring people together to create that space, and then everyone is responsible to chime in, to share the voice, to share the topic that's most important to them, and exposing the conflict very quickly during that format. So is there anything else? I mean, I know we talked about like invitation, engagement, executive coaching in terms of how to start with commitment and gauge the level of commitment, whether it's really explicit commitment or it's half-hearted commitment. And then we explored open space. I know there is something that you wanted to explore around like common knowledge or rituals. How does that play into the set of ideas that we just explored?
Yeah, before we go there, can we talk about engagement for a minute?
Sure.
I want your listeners to go to the Gallup. I want them to Google the term Gallup, Gallup, engagement studies, Gallup engagement. Go Google that, and you'll find that the Gallup organization has done the largest scientific study in the history of the world on human engagement at work. And they have found that engagement in the work is correlated, strongly correlated, almost linearly causal with things like customers who are delighted, employees who stay with the company, levels of employee morale, product quality, even increased share price, right? So employee engagement is absolutely essential. If there's one thing I want your listeners to come away with from this, is that I've never seen a high-performing team that didn't have engaged individuals. Have you?
No, I haven't seen it. I haven't heard about
I haven't seen it. And we know that decisions are engaging. And if you take the decisions away, people will disengage. So if engagement is essential, I want your listeners to think about this. How do we get more engagement in the change so that we can get all the good things that the Gallup data says we will get if people are engaged? Of course, this opens up the question, how can we engage the people? And of course, my answer to that is, let's invite them and let's see what they do. Let's put them on a decision to engage and see if they do or not. And then we do that in very small chunks. So in open space agility, we engage in 45 to 90 day chapters of change. And we're not asking them to do this for the rest of their career. We're asking them for 90 days to pretend and act as if and suspend their disbelief. And we start that in open space. And then 90 days later, we have another whole group open space event, Salah, where people can speak their mind. So when people know they can speak their mind in 90 days, they're more likely to play along. So we show them in the first open space before the 90 days kicks off, what's this meeting going to look like 90 days later? They experience that. And now they're much more willing to go along with it because they know it's not forever and they're going to get heard in 90 days, right? So that's my answer to how do we engage people? Well, let's invite them into the process of changing and let's see what ideas they have about how this organization can change in a healthy, positive, lasting, genuine way instead of an unhealthy, non-lasting, inauthentic way, which is what we have all over the world with agile adoption programs, which are really optimized on transactions for consulting firms and not transformations for clients. So that's my rant on engagement. If people come to my LinkedIn or they go to Open Leadership Network, you'll see that we publish positions on this. And our very first position is that employee engagement is absolutely essential for any lasting change. Now, isn't it interesting that the Agile community, which is 20 years old now, doesn't focus on employee engagement at all? In fact, it offers no guidance on how to engage people. The frameworks are like, well, just do the framework and then engagement happens here, except that it actually doesn't, because the frameworks are silent on how to engage people. That's because all the frameworks are push frameworks. They're not pull frameworks. So I want your listeners to think about that. And then we don't have much more time. So let's discuss, I guess, the ritual thing. This is kind of a deep concept that your listeners can go and learn more about through this. There's a book on Amazon. The title is Rational Ritual. Rational Ritual is a book written by an Asian PhD professor at UCLA who is a professor of political science. And here's what he says. If you want to coordinate really, really large groups of people, you need to generate common knowledge. Common knowledge is you know that I know that you know about this thing that might be a cultural norm or a way that we do things around here or what's going on right now in the organization. Common knowledge is known by everyone, and that ritual is the primary way to generate common knowledge. Okay. And that common knowledge is a primary tool or lever for scale. So everyone wants to scale agility around the world. And now there's this move to business agility, which is a far more difficult problem than mere software agility. So I'm giving your listeners something that's really golden here. Okay. Common knowledge. Go look it up and go look up the book Rational Ritual. He says that the primary way to generate common knowledge is through ritual events. And that's what open space is. And that's what OSA is. So open space is a one-day meeting. OSA is a 90-day timeline that begins with a one-day meeting and ends with a one-day meeting where everyone's invited. So when everyone's invited to a ritual event, that generates a boatload, a mound of common knowledge, which is very, very useful for scaling. For example, the author of the book Rational Ritual says that you can scale not just organizations, but societies and entire civilizations can scale with common knowledge. So this is a really, really important concept. And the last thing I would like to say to your listeners is that look up the word communitas, just like it sounds. It ends with ITAS, communitas. It's a Latin word. It means the spirit of community. It's the sense of belonging, right? So when we all engage in ritual together, ritual inspection of the process with intent to improve the process, that generates the spirit of community. So if you're the CEO and I'm some guy on a team that does testing, we both went through this thing together at your level of authorization, me at mine, but we have something in common. We both kind of suffered as we went through this change together, and we also experienced the ups and downs and the perils and the pitfalls and the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat and the rest of it. Communitas is the spirit of community. When people feel they're connected, they're less likely to leave your company, and they're more likely to bring their friends in to join in the fun that everyone's having. So ritual builds common knowledge. It also builds the spirit of community in a way that just is not possible otherwise. Open space is a ritual event, and we focus on science in this world, around the world for millennia, in all different places, in all different cultures, South America, North America, Europe, Asia, everywhere. Human beings have been engaging in ritual to get through difficult transitions, right? We call them rites of passage. Where you go in one way, you come out the other way. In other words, there's a transformation.
Yeah.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
So what we're doing with open space and OSA, is we're bringing this ritual to the modern tribe, to the modern corporation, the modern organization. And we're kind of going back to the real humanity of the thing. That's what it's all about.
These are great insights. The idea of changing together is very interesting, because most of the time changes either happens top down and it's more like an imposed change, and you go and do this change and leaders are disconnected from that, or shielded from like what's happening. And then there's like the bottom people who wants to change things, but the leaders are not on board, and they get frustrated and leave and go somewhere else. So having a ritual and the sense of community that we're doing this together through open space technology or open space agility, and these open patterns can really create a lot more success in change rather than just pretending to change. It's more real because we're doing it as a community, right? So how can people engage with you or look at your work? I know the Open Leadership Network is one of the places that you've been part of, and you're part of the founding team. Where else can people look at some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so on the web, you could, openleadershipnetwork.com is a great place to go. And then the real anchor link where you can find all of my stuff and my current contact information and everything else that's going on with me is danielmezick.com. mezick.com. So M-E-Z like zebra, I-C-K. That's my last name. So danielmezick.com will always get you to my current bio, what I'm doing now, links to my schedule for training, links to my schedule for reaching me, what my current thinking is, what I'm working on now, what conferences I'm talking at, what things I'm doing. So all of that is at danielmezick.com. That's where they can come.
Awesome. Thank you again, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. I really like how you bring a lot of different ideas and connect them in a way that is easy to understand, and bring these ideas from different domains can really help that change and make progress in what we're trying to do in the world and with organizations. So thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. It's great to speak with you, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity, then repeat.